Are you recording?
I'm gonna start now.
Do it.
Persuasion, you gotta get some. Welcome to possibly one of the darkest music episodes we're gonna cover in recent history. Today we're doing Throbbing Gristle's 20 jazz funk greats. I picked this for two reasons. One, I wanted to one, I wanted to get as far away from Kanye West as humanly possible. Because I felt like we were doing so much like jazzy hip hop for so long that I just like, needed a change of scene. Two, Genesis O Porridge died earlier on this year, and I had never listened to Throbbing Gristle before their death. And they were obviously a very important figure, kind of the art scene, and probably one of the people at the front line of kind of anti-binary, like gender binary rhetoric throughout, 80s, 90s, so a really important figure, and I was like, well, I really want to hear that Throbbing Gristle. So I thought doing it in the podcast, taking a friend with me, would be a fun way to dive into that stuff. And I also just thought it would be really funny to tell Matty to listen to an album called 20 Jazz Funk Greats
and torture.
I wasn't sure if you knew who they were, so I wanted you to expect something relating to jazz or funk. Obviously, the name of the band gives it away, but the album cover. I mean, you can easily.
I don't know. There are some 70s bands with really like weird names who sound really pleasant. I can't think of any right now, but I wasn't expecting this, but I wasn't expecting jazz funk. I'll say that.
Okay, well, that's interesting. That's cool. I kind of know what you mean. I had that with Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
I thought Led Zeppelin was going to be metal, and then it was very down to earth blues.
Yeah.
I think part of that is just like the definition of heavy in the 2010s is so different to what it was in like the 60s.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, we'll just jump right in. We've got a quickie for you guys. We've got a shorter episode today. Cozy episode. We're going to Beachy Head. We're going to the beach. Listen to some Throbbing Gristle. So I guess to start off, before I even ask you like what your history of Throbbing Gristle is, I'm curious as to like what your history with like industrial / like minimal synth music is. Like, is this something you've had an encounter with or been into, or is this something that is new, like this general vibe?
So this specific vibe is something very new to me. I think the closest I've come to some aspects of this music is probably ambient. There are moments like Exotica really reminded me of one of my favorite albums of last year, the Japanese ambient album compilation that I really, really loved. But that's very like just on the basis of how on how certain aspects of this album sound. The kind of journey that this album puts you through is something that I've truly never been through before. Even if I think I was more versed in industrial or as you say, minimal synth things, I think this would still be quite unique.
Yeah, I agree. And the kind of emotional arc of this album, probably the act it reminds me the most of, off the top of my head, is someone like Swans, who has no problem with throwing out an ambient piece or writing a song about killing people. It's not, and without being as playful or jovial or charming, something like Nick Cave. So yeah, but yeah, this is very much distinct and in a league of its own, kind of emotionally. I think even comparing it to Swans is slightly tenuous, because I think what really characterizes this album is a sardonic humor throughout the
Yeah.
whole thing. Even though it's so dark, there's always this underlying, almost nihilistic sense of comedy behind it.
And cynicism as well. I think cynicism is so central to the kind of sense of humor you're referring to, like in such a unique and in such a way that's so unique to just almost pure despair. Where you treat everything as hostile and faulted morally.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about like reference points for emotionally where this album took us, I think for me there were three big touchstones. Um, Songs like Beachy Head, uh, and some of the slower moments, like Tanith, really reminded me
Yeah.
of Angelo Badalamenti's work with David Lynch on films like Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, the show. Really very similar vibe. Same if conceptually, I think this is very similar to something like Twin Peaks. Now we can get into that later on. But also, the cinematic moments in this album really remind me of like Kubrick films, and especially something like A Clockwork Orange, with that kind of very dark, cynical, sardonic, while also having a real sense of comedy behind it and a
Yeah.
sick playfulness of just wanting to fuck with you, um, and challenge you. Those are my big kind of touchstones, and both are cinematic parallels. But yeah, anyway, I mean, how did you find it? I mean, any initial?
So right off the bat, I felt pranked on some level. I think what I expected is a middle ground between their name, the name of the band, and the actual album title. I knew there was going to be some twist here, but I didn't expect this. I expected 20 Jazz Funk Greats to be a sort of wink at the camera opener, and then the normal album would begin. And Beachy Head came on, and I just went, oh no, this is where we're going.
And you talk about like the gulf between the title and the album title, and in my opinion, like I went into this kind of, I like industrial bands like Nine Inch Nails and Ministry, so that's like my industrial background. Those are my favorite industrial bands. So I was expecting like, oh, this must be like what inspired bands like those that came slightly after. So I was expecting something like Throbbing Gristle, like I was expecting something really fast paced and like heavy and loud.
Yeah.
And it was so eerie and quiet. I was like, what? Like I did not expect this at all, even knowing it was an industrial album.
And I think you bring up like this is going to sound such a film nerd kind of like discussion, like, but I think you're really right to bring up Kubrick in particular. Another like reference point for me, it was almost American Beauty, where it treats corrupting aspects of the soul with kind of that cynicism and almost whimsicality in a way, which is what really brings out the darkness here. But to go back to my sort of overall experience, it was incredibly chilling, to be honest, especially the moments like Persuasion, for example, which is to be honest, one of my favorite moments here. I think what you ultimately have with this album is kind of a blueprint for almost losing touch with the soul and with society, and where it goes with that is introspection on the sort of fabric of people, and it's quite dark in the places that it leads you to consider as you listen to it.
Yep.
So that sort of adds to the layers of me feeling pranked with this one.
I think what you said about whimsy, there's a whimsy darkness to this album, really, in my opinion, gets to the heart at what I think this album is kind of trying to say as an artistic piece. Tootie, let me find her full name. I've written it down somewhere. Kosi Fanny Tootie. lead female vocalist on the album, talked recently in an interview at like a Red Bull convention or something weird like that about how
Oh my God.
their dream for this album is they imagined it would be the type of album you'd find in like a bargain bin in like some kind of British corner shop or and she just imagined like maybe someone at like middle-aged, quite quaint person coming and innocently finding 20 jazz funk greats. That looks delightful. I'm gonna take this home, and then getting home, listening to it, and having the shock of their lives. I think I think what the real statement of this album is kind of, I think it's about the English and our desire to think of ourselves as very quaint and pleasant and cozy and comfortable, and this inherent escapism that we trick ourselves into thinking is our reality. And underneath it all is this grimy, depressive culture of exploitation, which is hinted at, well, not hinted at, but touched on in Persuasion, and especially in the final track, which is like the sound of total oppression, of your oppressors saying try to eat us and get trapped or injured, and how crushing British culture is really at its heart. I think the song Exotica and moments like Exotica are all touch points for this, where the band said they were quite inspired by Martin Denny, who made an album called Exotica, which spurned a genre of exotica music. I don't know how critical the band is being on Martin Denny, but obviously exotic. This was music made by like a white guy in New York that was trying to make like Hawaiian music, basically. And I heard the album. It's a good album, but it is quintessential 50s cultural appropriation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole thing of like Western white cultures longing for this sort of fantasy escapism where we can enjoy places like Hawaii, and they just ignore the horrific things that allow us to enjoy places like Hawaii, if that makes sense. The colonialism, the imperialism, the class struggles, all that. And I think this album, weaving through lovely, almost saccharine, mockingly saccharine tracks like Hot on the Heels of Love and and Tanith, is it's all about that kind of, we brought up David Lynch earlier, that kind of subversion of like the nice cozy image Britain likes to have of itself, and all the darkness seething underneath. So on that level, I found it very compelling.
Yeah, so when you brought up the themes of British society and how we treat each other, what always comes to for me is the tension that lies beneath our conversations in British culture. And I'm just going to spoil my thoughts on my favorite song on the album. That is Persuasion, because I feel like this really gets to the heart of that tension and how harmful it can be, while also being a very sort of condemning track of the way sexual assault can manifest, of just gradually persuading people into sexual sexual acts that they don't want to take part in. It again gets to I feel like what that does is incredibly powerfully condemn the way that English people negotiate life, of burying their objectives and their beliefs underneath the surface, manifesting them personally and interpersonally in very subtle ways to try and get what they want. Not just, and I think it's kind of like what we talked about with like I, Daniel Blake, where this is an evil of the world. It's just an evil expressed in a very English way. Because I don't know where this came from. But we just have this fear of the we have this fear of exposure, and I think that kind of stems from Victorian values, and I think Victorian values leads me on to that sense of kind of the exotic, and I think that that lust for the exotic and lust for sex as well really comes from a barrenness in culture that I think this album is really trying to get to the heart of. The fact that there's something about the simplicity of the album cover, how saccharine, like you say, the lyrics can be, while satirical, it perfectly parodies the simplicity of joy that people barren of culture try to strive for. And I think this album sounds like the despair that people feel on the inside when they discover that cannot fulfill them.
Yeah, When you talk about that dichotomy, like despair lying right underneath, and this attempt to like feel good, and this is something we especially feel now in the age of the internet. I think I've said before. I'm not sure on the podcast, but scrolling through, haha, funny memes. Oh no, people are dying every day. Oh, more funny memes.
Yeah.
Just it's impossible. It's dissonance, and it's really telling. And kind of like if you think about what this would be like to listen to on vinyl, each side starts with a supposedly fun thing, fun David Foster Wallace reference for you guys at home, and then immediately followed with something incredibly dark. So the first side starts with 20 jazz funk greats, where the hushed vocals I read online are saying, "Yeah, nice, wine tonight, jazz, yes," and it's like it reminds me of like American Psycho or something. Like, oh yes, jazz, wine. This is fun.
Do you like Huey Lewis?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like that. And of course, that's followed by Beachy Head, which is set at the beach, which is a suicide hotspot in England, the most popular suicide site in Britain. And then the second disc opens with Hot on the Heels of Love, an absolutely lovely saccharine track, which is immediately followed by Persuasion. So, like, no matter where you'd put this on the record player, you'd get a moment of somewhat like cheeky fun, and then immediately like some of the darker shit on the album. So again, I think that sequencing was just really excellent.
100%. I just think it's so fascinating to examine albums in that way. So it's kind of a tangent, but like that is something completely lost in the internet age, and I really wonder how artists in coming years will kind of find their own way to sort of meddle with that. But yeah. Anyway, moving on.
We have to go into favorite, least favorite tracks. You go first.
Cool. So I'll start with Beachy Head. I'll go in order again. Beachy Head it lures you in with a false sense of ambience and peace. But there's this constant dark presence looming in the background musically, and as the track progresses, you feel that presence even more strongly, and the sort of peace that you begin to feel at the beginning of the track becomes sour, and it really, really perfectly parallels that sense of, again, like simplicity, a desire for simplicity versus the sort of darkness underneath. And it's just a gorgeously, on the face of it, a gorgeously haunting song that, like Josh said, awfully takes you by surprise and sets the tone really for the album you're about to experience. Next, I have Persuasion. I don't want to waste any much more time talking about Persuasion. I think the only thing I would say is that I think this is probably the vocal highlight of the album for me. There's something so haunting about the way the vocalist drags out the syllables of Persuasion that is so sinister, that is so essential to drawing out how horrible the culture that perpetuates this kind of sentiment is. And the last one I will bring up is 6660s. because I feel like this is truly the album just embracing the horror of the society that we dwell in, and after cynicism and satire and being sarcastic, it's truly just unabashedly oppressive and horrifying, and to the point that it can't go on for very long. It's only 2 minutes long, because any longer I think would genuinely be too horrifying. And for my least favorite song, I would. It's kind of it's not really my least favorite song. It's just probably the one I found probably the most challenging to listen to, and that's "What a Day." There's something so just terrifying about the chanting of "What a Day," and I think it's because it's so perfectly in the middle ground of demented and pleasant, which is kind of exactly exemplary of of the kind of thing they're trying to criticize. It's an amazing song, like for what they're trying to do with it, but there's something so darkly challenging about it that I really genuinely can't endure for very long. I really don't like it.
I really think Pete Orig's vocal performances throughout this album really bring it all together. Like, if this wasn't an industrial minimal synth album, What a Day would be a really cool post-punk song, right?
Yeah.
And it's really remarkable that, given how minimal and harsh this album often is, their vocals bring so much energy and spark and vibrant life to this album. A dark life, granted, but really give the album a potency that I don't think it would otherwise have.
And so to move on to my recommendation, well, okay. So this is an album that if you enjoy, I feel like comes with an asterisk. I think anyone can enjoy anything. I think taste is just something you describe yourself. I don't think taste is an actual matter of I can only enjoy these albums. But this is a difficult listen and not a light one. But I think understanding this, I think there's something almost in the way that understanding the threat of a horror film makes it less scary. Understanding what this album is trying to say and what it's trying to criticize makes these themes less immediate and the sound less threatening to yourself in a way. In a way that's kind of exactly what the album's going for, is criticizing that suburban sense of complacency. But there's something reassuring about understanding that this album is critical of a culture as a whole, rather than you, or essentially attempting to scare the pants off you. But at the same time, this is a haunting, chilling listen, and I really would recommend it if that's what you're looking for.
Awesome, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just rattle off my favorite tracks. From earliest in the track list to onwards in the track list. I love the first half of this album, but I do genuinely think it only gets better as it goes along. So "Hot on the Heels of Love," which is quite possibly like the most enjoyable track of this album for me. I saw a comment on Rate Music that while this album is very, intentionally strange and wants to freak you out and trick you with the album cover, this might be one of the most accessible songs Throbbing Gristle ever made, and you could maybe get away with playing this at a very cool wedding. It's quite a fun track. And again, this album's really cinematic. The pulsing synth on the song is so infectious and feels like something out of like a pulpy cyberpunk flick. Yeah, there is something really silly and mocking about this track, and the cheesy imitation of what would be a sultry, whispered "Hot on the Heels of Love. I'm waiting for love from above." Like it sounds like something, that himbo space guy from Futurama. Like, if that dude made an album, this is like, that's a lyric he would sing.
It feels like it's very slightly reminiscent of Velvet Underground for me. If they were to write a more satirical track, I feel like.
Yeah,
But anyway,
I
yeah, it's very
could see
cool.
Lou Reed writing something like that. With a
Yeah.
very like ironic, sardonic, saccharine, smarmy vibe. And yeah, Tutti gives amazing performances throughout this album. Next up, I agree with Matty, Persuasion. Perhaps the most fucked up song for me on this album. Very uncomfortable to listen to. I think what makes this so difficult to listen to is it does remind me a lot of Clockwork Orange in terms of like Alex, the main character of Clockwork Orange, is deplorable, a horrible person. However, he is also very charismatic and likable. And I feel the same way about P. Orange's vocal performance here, which is like oddly jovial and playful in a way that's so menacing. Like when he's like, "Oh, they only go to middle-aged men, so why don't you just do as I suggest?" Like it's so British and like, and convincing in the worst way, if that makes sense. It's trying to be chummy, and it's gross in how chummy it's trying to sound. And then perhaps the craziest thing about this album is in my opinion, the most catchy moment is the part where he says, content warning for like sexual weird shit. Skip forward 10 seconds. I've got a little biscuit tin to keep your panties in. Soiled panties, school panties, Y-front panties by the canal. So creepy.
Yeah.
Why
Shocking.
is it so... Yeah, it's the most catchy lyrical moment on the album, which is says it all really. So yeah, great track, very uncomfortable, made me cringe. I agree with Matty. 6660s, track 11, the closer, is another favorite of mine. I love the muddy, aimless, scuzzy guitar line underneath. Interestingly, JPEG Mafia has stated that Throbbing Gristle is one of the acts he took inspiration from when developing his production style. And I think this is really quite clear on Veteran, looking back.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Especially with the quiet moments in the album. But the guitar line really reminds me of the kind of breakdown at the end of Beta Male Strategies. That kind of droning, fuzzy guitar sound and tone. But yeah, this track I love it because I feel like in this final moment, while this album is very tongue-in-cheek and very sardonic, this final moment there's very little comedy, and it's the most kind of pointed track that gets the themes of structural exploitation and total oppression across. The imagery of this kind of oppression leaving people, like wasted limbs that get smaller. This is a very direct statement of the themes and statement about Britain that this album is trying to get across. And it's these conditions I think this track kind of hints towards that makes places like Beachy Head so popular for people to kill themselves in. Like mental health is real, but a society that structurally alienates and oppresses people leads to more depressed people. So yeah,
we materialists on this podcast.
Yeah, we stand Mark Fisher. Anyway, so yeah, very cool, very cool closer track. Before I go into my recommend, you said something about kind of maybe the thing about how it's okay if you don't like this album and that doesn't make you dumb. Did you say something according to that vibe?
It was more about well, yeah, that too, obviously, but also just because your tastes don't align with certain things, your taste is sort of an ever expanding thing, and you might give something like this a try and find it sort of fits with you, and that can become a new part of your taste.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it made me think of, I looked up Throbbing Gristle meme because I like looking at memes of stuff I'm consuming, see what the general cultural zeitgeist, how it treats it. And it was really weird because a lot they're all really dated. They're all from like 2008 or something.
Oh my god!
So opposite ends of the spectrum. We've got the Willy Wonka meme where he's like leaning on his head in a descending way. Do you remember that meme?
Yeah. Oh really?
You can just Google Throbbing Gristle meme. You can see the shit I'm talking about. So the Willy Wonka one says, "Oh, you've recently discovered Throbbing Gristle. You must be really old school industrial." So that kind of like condescending, haha, this is such a basic normie industrial thing. The internet is so weird.
Yeah.
And then the other end of the spectrum is a meme classic misogyny meme of a man giving a woman flowers, and the flowers are labeled Throbbing Gristle, and the woman is turned away in disgust, labeled someone who lied about listening to all types of music. So what I'm saying is, don't be caught up in the whirlwind of snobbery and elitism that surrounds albums like this. It's a really great album. I'd recommend it. Strong recommend. I think it's wonderful.
Just like what you like, and dislike what you dislike, and end it.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy we got to discuss this and get as far away from the life of Pablo as humanly possible. So,
despite the fact that it's a better album than My Beautiful Dark Twisted.
It's true. The Life of Pablo is actually, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I can. I don't know why I said it's true. I can't go with you there. I can't go with you. What are we doing next week?
So next week we're doing The Warrior from 2001. This is a epic period piece set in feudal India.
Is it longer than 3 hours?
It is 86 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, you're all good. Don't worry. It's essentially a set on the premise of a warrior renouncing their loyalty to a sort of oppressive lord, and it's like a man on the run film, but set in feudal India. And I'm really excited, to be honest. The filmmaker is Asif Kapadia, whose most known work is the fantastic documentary Amy from 2015. But this film is quite well respected, and I'm just really excited to see it, and because I haven't seen too much about it, but yeah, it should be really fun.
Cool. I've never heard of that film, and I look forward to discovering it.
Awesome. Yeah.
So thanks for joining me today, Matthew. Somber podcast. One of the saddest albums you've ever covered.
Yeah.
But it was fun to get into this, and yeah, we're definitely going to do more minimal synth soon.
Awesome.
So yeah.
No, I super enjoyed talking about it. That was awesome.
So we'll catch you all later at home. See you next week, and ta-ta.
Thank you so much for listening. Bye. Persuasion.